Welcome, everyone, to Beyond Sunday. I'm Pastor Aaron Maroney, and I'm so glad you chose to tune in today. Have you ever struggled with leaving a church that you grew up in? If so, I'm talking with Maggie today, and I hope that her story would encourage you and inspire you to look and find the true Jesus. Maggie, thank you so much for joining us today in the room just to share more about your story. I'd love to just give you the floor, kind of start towards the beginning and tell us about your discovery of Jesus, what that was like.
Well, thanks for having me, Aaron. And
Yeah.
actually, I want to be very clear that this is the Lord's story. This isn't
Amen.
me here talking about my life per se. It's a story of how the Lord's faithfulness has pursued me every day of my life.
Amen.
And as one does, we have to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yes. Take
So
us back.
when I was born, I was born into a Catholic family. Both my parents were Catholic school graduates. I was baptized as a Catholic. And then when I was 2, my dad was killed in a midair collision.
Mm,
And so then it was just my mom and me.
so hard.
And when I was nearly 4, she remarried the man who I grew up with as my dad. Just the kindest, most wonderful human being.
Hmm.
And he also happened to be a Mormon.
Okay.
And so that was when our life changed pretty dramatically. My mom joined the Mormon church, and as a 4-year-old, I got dragged along.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, Aaron, that even being 4 years old, I remember a very dramatic shift in our home. I can only describe it as a darkness that enveloped our home. And let's be clear again, it was not that my dad was unkind or not a good man, but there was a change in the atmosphere.
Mm.
And case in point, I developed what my family lovingly referred to as my imaginary friend, which is normally cute, but my imaginary friend was dark
Oh.
and he was somewhat shapeless and he was bad.
Oh.
And I would always tell my mom I was afraid and I wanted her to lock him in the basement.
Oh my goodness.
He was terrifying, but he became a part of my life. And he had a name, and it was, I don't remember the day that he went away, but I do very vividly remember him being a part of my early childhood. And that was just part of the darkness that enveloped
Yeah.
my home, as even was my perception as a small child. Even as a young girl, I felt a presence of light that was pursuing me, and I didn't understand it, and I couldn't put language on it. I was being raised in the Mormon faith, and so I was, very clear on the Mormon theology and the rules and the works. And I also knew what I could and could not do.
Mm.
Mormons can't do things like wear crosses. They don't recite the Lord's
Oh.
Prayer, the various things like that. And so what I would do, I would ride my bike to the public library and I found the big picture books with the big pictures of Jesus and I taught myself the Lord's Prayer,
Oh
which
my
seems like
gosh.
an odd thing for a child to do, but for some reason I was drawn
Yes.
to a Jesus that I didn't know. And that kind of became my trajectory for the next several years. I was seeking something I couldn't put language on, but that I felt was pursuing me and I didn't know why. Because to put it very glibly, I believed the Lord had a giant cosmic notebook and he wrote down everything that I did that was bad
Oh.
because it was a works-based theology and I was never, ever, ever going to be good enough. And I knew that. And so I was seeking something that felt good and warm and light. And it was in my teenage years that I began hearing the audible voice of what I now know as the Lord.
Wow.
At the time, I couldn't put language on that. For example, I was 16, driving without a seatbelt
Mm.
because I thought I was pretty cool. My little brother was in the car with me, and all of a sudden, I very clearly heard, Maggie, put on your seatbelt. My name was used, so I'm like, I looked at my brother. Well, he didn't have a deep voice. He was a child. I said, "Did you just say something?" He's like, "No." Clicked my seatbelt, and within seconds, we were hit by a semi. It completely crunched the entire car. It was totaled in every
Oh my
way.
gosh.
And my brother and I walked away unscathed.
Oh.
And so I was confused by that. I knew it wasn't my brother. I'm like, is it my deceased dad? I was trying again to put language on what was happening to and with me and couldn't figure it out. And so um I entered what I considered my duplicitous years, which means that
Love that.
I would go to what they referred to as Mormon seminary every morning of high school at 6 a.m. I had to be up and at someone's house to learn Mormon theology for 4 years
Mm-hmm.
at 6 in the morning.
Oof.
And I would go to church on Wednesday nights to our youth group, and I would show up for 3 hours of church on Sunday. But on Saturday,
Mm.
I would find a friend whose family went to Saturday church. So you thought I was going to say something naughty. And
Well, it was naughty for your
it
house.
was. And I started looking for God at the Catholic Church.
Wow.
I started looking for him at the Methodist Church. I looked for him at the Lutheran Church, and I liked how I felt there, but I still didn't really encounter God. And so by the time I graduated from high school, I did the only thing I thought I could do, and that was move to Utah. Because if
Mhm.
you can't be a good Mormon in Utah, you probably can't be one anywhere.
Yes.
Was kind of my mission statement. And
Yep.
so I went out to Utah to just dive headfirst into all the Mormon theology that I'd been trained in. And at that point, I was old enough that I could start doing some of the ordinances and I again like to say the hoops that they have you jump through, but a lot of the works that you have to check the box on in order to get into heaven. And that's a whole other
Wow.
thing.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, okay, I've looked for this God or this light or this feeling my whole life, and I haven't found it yet. So I'm going to find it in Utah. And so I began that. And what I found, Erin, is that there are very, very good Mormons in Utah who actually live what they
Yep.
practice what they preach.
Yep.
And then there are the Jack Mormons, and they became my people. And
What are the Jack
the
Mormons?
Jack Mormons are the people who are cultural Mormons.
Sure.
So, in order to fit in society,
Mhm.
because Mormons are still the majority in
Yeah.
Utah, to fit in society, in business, in life, you put on your little Mormon face and you smile and you say all the right things and you use all the right words and you show up for church on Sunday, and then the rest of the week you do whatever you want.
Sure.
And so that's where I fell, except for
Yeah.
in my spirit, that hypocrisy just felt so wrong.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to force a fit, and I knew I was missing something, but I wasn't finding it. And honestly, by my third year of college, having lived in Utah for 3 years, I was clinically depressed.
Hmm.
I found myself on the filthy, disgusting dorm carpet crying out to the Lord, not even sure who he was.
Right.
My parents drove out from Ohio, packed me up, put me in the car to drive from the Salt Lake Valley back to Ohio. And it was at that point that my dad, who's a very loving man, looked at me and he said, "I'm so sorry my church did not work out for you,
Hmm.
but don't give up on God."
Wow.
Which just landed on me because I didn't know that he knew that I was looking for God, but
Hmm.
he knew his church had failed me
Wow.
and that it wasn't what I needed, that I really was trying,
Yes.
and that I was not okay. I was really, really not okay. And that simple phrase from my dad gave me the freedom to begin actually looking
Hmm.
out loud for God. And so I went back to one of the Lutheran churches in my very small hometown in Northwest Ohio, and I found the world's most unswervingly patient man named Pastor Tim, who spent the next calendar year with me,
Hmm.
teaching me about the actual Jesus, handing me the actual Bible that had not been altered by Joseph Smith, which is something I didn't know growing up as a Mormon, that Joseph Smith actually messed with the language and the verbiage. And so, for example, in Ephesians, when Paul says it is by grace that we are saved, Joseph Smith added, "after all that we can do,"
Oh my gosh.
because it's the works-based theology. And I knew I could never do enough. And so
When can the grace save me? When if all
after
I
all
can
that I can do.
and I can't do it all, so
Right.
his grace will never save me. That was kind of what you were living in your spirit.
100%.
Oh my goodness.
And I knew that I was the chief sinner among sinners, and that and that it just was never going to work out well for me, because that cosmic notebook had to be full of all the things that I had done. And so a year of letting the real grace saturate into my bones, reading the Gospel of John for the first time with new eyes. It was like scales had fallen from my eyes. Reading James 1:5, the Mormons love that one, because if you lack knowledge, you ask God for it. Well, that's when Joseph Smith supposedly has had his encounter with God the Father and created the Mormon Church. And I was actually able to use James's correct words and ask the Lord for the knowledge just between the two of us without that intercessory person in between. And so at that point was when I was dating the man who's now been my husband for 31 years, who said, I'm devoutly Christian and I would like to marry you at some point, but I need you to be a Christian too.
Yeah.
And so I began to take my faith very seriously. That was the first time I, as I said, had read a Bible that had not been altered. And I had to borrow John's because I didn't own my own. And then in 2000, I was invited to come to my very first Bible study, and I just was ravenous. I couldn't get enough of the content and the relationship and that feeling that I had felt my whole entire life. That voice that I would hear was actually the same Lord who saw me on the carpet in college, who was like, get up and get out, because I have so much more for you. I've been running after you your whole life. You just didn't know it. I saw you, and now it's time for you to see me. And so I leaned into that, and I'm a teacher by profession, and I found a job at a church where I could teach music. I could teach Bible studies to women. I did that for 17 years as a lay high-level volunteer, teaching women to read the Bible, to see Jesus the way I had finally learned to see him. And then it was in 2018 that I heard the Lord's voice again when he very clearly called me into ministry and to seminary. And just the honor and the weight of that considering where I had come from, the darkness, all of the things that I had experienced, that he saw me and he could use me.
Yes.
After all that time was just profound.
After all that time, it was his plan all along, saying, Maggi, knowing you by name, calling you by name, instilling in you actually the knowledge of who he is. James 1:5, like, ask him for wisdom and knowledge and he'll give it to you. Like he was already giving that to you, like he does for us too, like the revelation of who he is. And I love that curiosity and hunger that you had ever since a young child got to be realized in Jesus Christ, the true Jesus.
I was just looking for him in all the wrong places.
Yeah. But he didn't give up.
He never gave up on me. He was in his word the whole time.
Yep. Just had to find it.
I just had to find it.
I love that. Well, my story is not similar in a lot of ways, but similar in one, that when I was 12, I went to a middle school retreat and someone told the gospel plainly for the first time. And I had always known God. Like as a young girl, I grew up Catholic, young girl, I was always known God. I would talk about God and Jesus, and had a personal relationship. I really truly believe that I did, but I didn't know, didn't have the language to be saved, didn't have the language to call out to him. And so someone shared the gospel and I was like, this is what I've known. So it's similar to you where it's like, I've known this and I've looked for it. And finally you had the words. And now, as I'll just land here, I just want to, brag on you for a moment as you continue to teach and pastor at our church for 3 years. You did our middle school girls retreat and got to share bits and pieces of your story, got to preach from the word. And so now hundreds more young girls like I was when I was 12 when I went to camp get to know the real Jesus too. So thank you.
It is absolutely my pleasure.
It's the best. Well, thank you, Maggi, for coming, and thank you all for joining us on Beyond Sunday. I hope that maybe this would encourage you to step from darkness into the light as well. Search and find the true Jesus. He is waiting for you, and he is found in his word. So thank you. We'll see you next week on Beyond Sunday.